It was a typical humid summer night in Loveland, Ohio. My best friend Jack and I were sitting on my porch, the air filled with the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. We had a couple of beers in our hands, the condensation dripping onto the wooden planks beneath our feet. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape, and we were enjoying the stillness that only comes from living in a small town. We'd been reminiscing about our high school days, laughing about the dumb things we did and how we managed to survive our teenage years relatively unscathed. The night was perfect, or at least it seemed that way until we heard a strange noise coming from the woods across the road. It was a low, guttural croak, unlike anything I had ever heard before. Jack paused mid-sentence, his face turning serious. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkness. "Yeah," I replied, my heart starting to race. "What do you think it was?" "Probably just a bullfrog," Jack said, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Loveland was known for its folklore, and one story in particular always seemed to come up this time of year: the Loveland Frogman. According to legend, the Loveland Frogman was a humanoid frog creature, about 4 feet tall, that had been spotted by various people over the years. The first sighting was in 1955, and there had been several others since then, each one more bizarre than the last. I never put much stock in those stories, chalking them up to overactive imaginations or too much to drink. But that night, with the strange noise echoing in the stillness, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. Jack and I sat in silence for a few moments, listening intently. The croaking noise came again, louder this time and closer. We exchanged a glance, and without saying a word, we both stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense trees, casting long, shifting shadows that made it difficult to see anything clearly. "Maybe we should check it out," Jack suggested, his voice a whisper. "Are you crazy?" I hissed back. "What if it's actually the Frogman?" Jack laughed nervously. "Come on, man, you don't really believe in that stuff, do you?" I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. There was something about the night, the way the air seemed to crackle with electricity, that made me feel like anything was possible. Against my better judgment, I nodded, and we carefully made our way down the steps and across the road. As we approached the edge of the woods, the croaking grew louder, almost deafening. It sounded like it was coming from just beyond the first line of trees. Jack took the lead, pushing through the underbrush with me close behind. The ground was damp and muddy, our shoes squelching with every step. We hadn't gone far when we saw it. Standing in a small clearing illuminated by a shaft of moonlight was the Loveland Frogman. It was exactly as the stories described, about 4 feet tall with leathery greenish skin, bulging eyes, and a wide frog-like mouth. It stood on 2 legs, its long, webbed fingers hanging at its sides. For a moment we were both frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The frogman seemed just as surprised to see us, its eyes widening as it stared back at us. Then, in a blur of motion, it leaped into the air, landing several feet away with a splash as it disappeared into a small pond hidden by the underbrush. "Did you see that?" Jack whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you actually see that?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "Yeah, I saw it." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where the frogman had vanished. My mind was racing, trying to process what we had just witnessed. It didn't make any sense, but there was no denying what we had seen. The Loveland Frogman was real. Eventually, we made our way back to the porch, our hearts still pounding. We didn't say much as we sat down and picked up our beers, both of us lost in our thoughts. The night seemed different now, the air heavy with a sense of the unknown. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Jack asked finally, breaking the silence. I shook my head. "Probably not, but it doesn't matter. We know what we saw." Jack nodded, and we fell silent again, listening to the sounds of the night. The croaking had stopped, replaced by the familiar chirping of the crickets. Everything seemed normal, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. We stayed on the porch until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, neither of us wanting to go inside. It felt like we were guarding a secret, something that connected us to a world beyond our own. As the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the landscape, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. We had seen something incredible, something that few people would ever get to experience. And as we finally went inside to get some sleep, I knew that I would never forget that night. The Loveland Frogman was real, and we had the privilege of seeing it with our own eyes. It was a clear autumn evening when I first saw the dingbat. I had been walking through the woods near my house, enjoying the crisp air and the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. The forest, with its towering trees and thick underbrush, was a place I often visited to clear my mind. Little did I know that on this particular evening I would encounter something extraordinary. I had been walking for about an hour when I decided to take a break by a small, familiar clearing. This spot was a favorite of mine, with a fallen log that made a perfect bench. As I sat there sipping from my water bottle, I noticed the forest had grown unusually quiet. The usual chorus of birds and insects had ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming the animals had simply moved on. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. It was quick, almost a blur, but I was certain something was there. I turned my head, scanning the area where I had seen the motion, and that's when I saw it, the dingbat. It was unlike any creature I had ever seen. Standing about 3 feet tall, it had a thin, almost skeletal frame covered in matted fur that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. Its eyes were large and round, glowing with an unsettling luminescence. The creature's limbs were long and spindly, ending in clawed hands and feet that gripped the ground with an almost unnatural ease. For a moment I was frozen, unable to believe what I was seeing. The dingbat seemed to sense my presence, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. Despite the fear that gripped me, I couldn't look away. It was as if the creature was drawing me in, compelling me to stay and watch. The dingbat moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing the air around it. It sniffed the ground, its nostrils flaring with each intake of breath. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it darted into the underbrush, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The forest remained silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what might happen next. I sat there for several minutes, trying to process what I had just witnessed. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it. Was it some sort of prank, a figment of my imagination? But the details were too vivid, too real. I knew what I had seen, even if there was no logical explanation for it. After a while, I decided to head back home. The encounter had left me shaken, and I wanted the comfort of familiar surroundings. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the dingbat to reappear. But the forest remained quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves beneath my feet. When I finally reached home, I immediately grabbed my phone and began searching for any information about dingbats. To my surprise, there were numerous accounts of sightings, each one describing a creature similar to the one I had seen. Some claimed it was a cryptid, a creature whose existence was suggested but unproven. Others believed it was a spirit or an otherworldly being. Despite the numerous accounts, there was one common thread. No one had ever managed to capture a clear photograph of the dingbat. The few images that did exist were blurry and indistinct, often dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. It seemed the dingbat was a master of evasion, always appearing just long enough to be seen, but never long enough to be documented. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to the forest, hoping for another glimpse of the elusive creature. I brought my camera with me, determined to capture proof of its existence. But no matter how long I waited or how carefully I searched, the dingbat remained elusive. The forest seemed almost ordinary again, as if the encounter had been nothing more than a strange dream. Yet I knew it was real. The memory of those glowing eyes and the creature's strange, almost ethereal presence was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dingbat was out there, watching and waiting. Without photographic evidence, my story was met with skepticism. Friends and family humored me, listening to my tale with polite interest but obvious doubt. It was frustrating, knowing I had seen something extraordinary but unable to prove it to anyone else. In the end, I came to accept that some things are meant to remain a mystery. The dingbat, whatever it was, existed beyond the reach of cameras and scientific explanations. It was a reminder that the world still holds secrets, waiting to be discovered by those willing to look. Every so often I returned to the clearing, hoping for another encounter. The forest, with its secrets and silences, remains a place of wonder and possibility. And though I may never capture a photograph of the dingbat, the memory of that autumn evening will stay with me forever, a testament to the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of understanding. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the vast expanse of the ocean. I had always loved the sea, its endless mysteries and hidden treasures calling out to my adventurous spirit. I had spent countless hours exploring the coastlines, but today was different. Today I was on a small fishing boat, far from the shore, with nothing but the horizon in sight. Little did I know this journey would lead me to an encounter with the legendary sea monk. The sea monk is a creature of myth, said to dwell in the deep waters of the ocean. Descriptions of it vary, but the most common tale is of a being with the body of a fish and the head of a monk. Many sailors had claimed to see it, but few could provide any proof. Some said it was a harbinger of doom, while others believed it to be a guardian of the sea's secrets. As the boat gently rocked on the waves, I cast my line into the water. The sea was unusually calm, and the air was filled with the salty scent of the ocean. I watched the sun dip lower in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange. The tranquil beauty of the scene made it easy to forget the tales of the sea monk and the dangers of the deep. Hours passed, and the sun had long disappeared below the horizon. The sky was now a canvas of twinkling stars, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of the waves against the boat and the occasional cry of a distant seabird. I was beginning to think my fishing trip would end without any excitement when I felt a sudden strong tug on my line. My heart raced as I struggled to reel in whatever had taken the bait. The pull was powerful, much stronger than any fish I had ever caught. My arms ached from the effort, and my mind raced with possibilities. Could it be a giant fish, or perhaps something even more extraordinary? With a final mighty heave, I managed to pull my catch to the surface. My eyes widened in astonishment as I beheld the creature before me. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. The body was covered in scales that shimmered in the moonlight, and its fins were long and flowing like delicate underwater wings. But it was the head that truly took my breath away. It resembled a monk with a bald, human-like face and a pair of deep, wise eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. I had found the sea monk. The creature regarded me with a calm, almost serene expression. There was no fear or hostility in its gaze, only a sense of quiet curiosity. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, two beings from different worlds, brought together by the mysterious pull of the ocean. The sea monk slowly began to move, its graceful movements mesmerizing to watch. It circled the boat, its eyes never leaving mine. I felt a strange connection to the creature, as if it was trying to communicate with me in some unspoken way. The stories I had heard about the sea monk suddenly felt real, and I realized that this was a moment I would never forget. As the night wore on, the sea monk remained close to the boat, swimming alongside me as if it were a silent companion. I felt a sense of peace in its presence, a feeling that I was part of something greater than myself. The ocean, with all its wonders and mysteries, had granted me a glimpse into a world few ever see. Eventually, the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon, casting a soft glow over the water. The sea monk paused, its eyes meeting mine one last time. There was a sense of farewell in its gaze, a silent understanding that our encounter was coming to an end. With a graceful sweep of its fins, the creature dove beneath the surface, disappearing into the depths of the ocean. I watched the ripples fade, my heart filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The sea monk was real, and I had been fortunate enough to witness its beauty firsthand. As I turned the boat back towards the shore, I knew that this experience would stay with me forever. The sea, with all its secrets, had revealed to me a piece of its magic. The journey back was filled with a sense of wonder. I could still picture the sea monk's wise eyes and serene expression. The world felt different now, as if I had been given a new perspective on life. The ocean, vast and mysterious, was no longer just a place of adventure. It was a realm of enchantment, where legends came to life. Back on land, I tried to share my story with others, but many were skeptical. They laughed and called it a fisherman's tale, a product of an overactive imagination. But I knew the truth. I had seen the sea monk, and that knowledge was enough for me. The ocean had chosen to reveal one of its greatest secrets to me, and I would cherish that memory forever. Each time I returned to the sea, I felt a deeper connection to its waters. I continued to explore, always hoping for another glimpse of the sea monk. Though I never saw the creature again, I felt its presence in the gentle waves and the whispering breeze. The sea was alive with magic, and I was grateful to be a part of its world. The legend of the sea monk lived on in my heart, a reminder of the beauty and mystery that lie beneath the surface of the ocean. It taught me to look beyond the ordinary, to seek out the extraordinary in the world around me. And as I sailed the waters, I knew that the spirit of the sea monk was with me, guiding my adventures and keeping the magic of the sea alive. I never thought vampires were real. They always seemed like something out of a gothic novel, a figment of dark imaginations meant to thrill and terrify. But that was before I met Claire. Claire was new to our little town, moving into the old creaky house at the end of Maple Street. The house had a history, rumors of hauntings, mysterious disappearances, and strange occurrences, but Claire dismissed them all with a laugh and a wave of her hand. She was charming, with an effortless grace that seemed almost otherworldly. I first met her at the local bookstore. She was browsing the classics section, her fingers trailing lightly over the spines of well-worn books. I was there looking for something new to read, something to escape the monotony of small-town life. When I saw her, I was struck by how out of place she looked, like a character from another era. Her clothes were simple but elegant, her hair a cascade of dark curls, and her eyes were the most striking of all, a deep, almost hypnotic shade of green. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual. "Looking for something in particular?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her lips. She replied, her voice smooth and melodic. We struck up a conversation about books, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. Claire was well-read with a deep appreciation for literature. We talked about everything from Shakespeare to modern fiction, and I found myself drawn to her in a way I couldn't quite explain. There was something magnetic about her, something that made it hard to look away. Over the next few weeks, we became fast friends. Claire and I would meet at the bookstore or the little cafe on Main Street and talk for hours. She was always interested in what I had to say, always curious and engaged. It was refreshing having someone who seemed to genuinely care about my thoughts and feelings. But there was something odd about Claire, too. She never seemed to eat or drink anything when we were out. She would order a coffee or a pastry, but she never actually consumed them. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged and said she wasn't very hungry. I didn't press the issue. It seemed rude to pry. Then there were her habits. Claire was never available during the day, always suggesting we meet in the evening or at night. She claimed to be a night owl, preferring the quiet and solitude of the late hours. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone has their quirks, but as time went on, it began to feel strange, almost as if she were hiding something. One night we were walking through the park, the moonlight casting long shadows on the path. It was a chilly evening and I pulled my coat tighter around me. Claire, however, seemed unaffected by the cold. She wore a thin dress, her skin pale and unblemished in the silver light. "Don't you get cold?" I asked, shivering slightly. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not really. I guess I'm just used to it." We continued walking in silence for a while, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Claire wasn't telling me, something just beneath the surface. "Claire," I began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, her eyes locking onto mine. "Why did you move here? To this town, I mean. It's so small and quiet. It doesn't seem like the kind of place someone like you would choose." She looked thoughtful for a moment, then sighed. "I needed a change," she said softly. "I needed to get away from my old life, start fresh. This place seemed peaceful." There was a sadness in her voice that I hadn't heard before, a hint of something deeper. I wanted to ask more, to understand what she was running from, but I sensed that it was a delicate subject. Instead, I nodded and let it go, not wanting to push her away. A few nights later, everything changed. I was walking home from the bookstore, the streets empty and quiet. I took a shortcut through an alley, trying to get out of the cold as quickly as possible. As I turned a corner, I saw Claire standing there, her back to me. She was facing a man, tall and well-dressed, who seemed to be arguing with her. "Claire?" I called out, stepping closer. She turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. The man looked at me too, his expression unreadable. There was something predatory in his gaze. "Leave," Claire said sharply, her voice trembling slightly. "Go home." I hesitated, confused and concerned. "Is everything okay?" "Go home," she repeated, more urgently this time. "Run," she shouted at me, her eyes flashing with an intensity that left no room for argument. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop until I was safely inside my house, the door locked behind me. I stood there panting and shaking, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The next day, Claire was gone. Her house was empty, her phone disconnected. It was as if she had never been there at all. I tried to find her, to understand what had happened, but there were no answers to be found. The only thing I had was the memory of that night, and the nagging feeling that I had missed something important. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I couldn't stop thinking about Claire. I wondered where she was, if she was safe. I wondered what she had been hiding, what secrets she had kept from me. And most of all, I wondered if I would ever see her again. Life went on and I tried to move forward, but the memory of Claire lingered. She was like a shadow, always just out of reach, always in the back of my mind. I found myself drawn to the bookstore, to the park, to all the places we had spent time together, hoping for a glimpse of her. One night, months after she had disappeared, I was walking through the park again. The moon was full, casting a pale light over everything. I sat down on a bench, lost in thought, when I heard a familiar voice. "Hello?" I looked up and there she was, standing in front of me. She looked the same, yet different. There was a confidence in her stance, a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Claire," I breathed, standing up. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I had to leave." "I don't understand," I said, shaking my head. "What happened? Who was that man?" She took a deep breath, then looked me in the eyes. "There's a lot you don't know about me, things I can't explain easily. But I want you to know that I care about you. I always have." I felt a rush of emotions, relief, confusion, anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't safe," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't risk it." We stood there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, she reached out and took my hand, her touch cool and gentle. "I can't stay," she said. "But I wanted to see you one last time, to say goodbye." I felt a lump in my throat, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Will I ever see you again?" She smiled sadly. "Maybe. Someday." And then she was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as she had come. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been, my heart aching with the loss. It was a typical evening at home, just me and my cat lounging lazily on the couch. The soft glow of the TV illuminated the room as I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone. Suddenly, a notification popped up on my screen. Motion detected in the backyard. Curiosity piqued, I tapped on the alert and brought up the live feed from my security camera. What I saw next made my heart skip a beat. A bright light hovering silently above the trees at the edge of my property. At first, I thought it might be a glitch in the camera, or perhaps a stray drone, but as I zoomed in, the shape became unmistakable, a UFO. My mind raced with disbelief as I watched the strange craft, its metallic surface gleaming faintly in the night. It seemed to defy gravity, hanging effortlessly in the air. I glanced over at my cat, who was now wide-eyed and alert, as if sensing the anomaly outside. As I continued to watch, mesmerized, the UFO emitted a soft, pulsating light that bathed the surrounding area in an otherworldly glow. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, trying to comprehend the enormity of what I was witnessing, a genuine, unidentified flying object right in my backyard. Just then, the craft began to move, gliding noiselessly across the sky with an elegant grace that seemed almost surreal. It darted between the stars, performing maneuvers that defied any conventional aircraft known to man. I knew in that moment that this was something beyond human technology, beyond any explanation I could fathom. As quickly as it had appeared, the UFO vanished into the darkness, leaving me staring at an empty sky, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. I sat there for a long while, replaying the footage over and over, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Eventually, I gathered my wits and called a friend who shared my fascination with the unknown. We analyzed the footage together, discussing theories and marveling at the sheer improbability of our encounter. And as the night wore on, one thing became clear. We had both become witnesses to a moment that would forever change our understanding of the universe.